I have always thought that Homecoming is a really, really interesting card to use in a White Wolf shell. I've always wanted to test it, I just don't have White Wolves, so I can't. So I have no data on it, so while I'm really interested in it, I'm like, my head tells me that Silverbolt is still the best of the three. My heart tells me that King Elephant is the undisputed king. But my brain's probably going to go similar to Exo here about perhaps Homecoming will work, it has its advantages, and we'll really have to see how it goes here for data.
And it's interesting to think about because we talked about yesterday, mid-shadow, one of its greatest strengths, especially against Roach, is something like Death's Breath, right? Multiple wards, kind of, you don't need a beefy ward, you just need to have different amounts of them because that's what really stops Roach, right? When you have to swing multiple cards into those wards and you start losing Roaches here and there, then you don't have the potential to sling damage through as effectively. Homecoming is the only card out of Silverbolt and King Elephant that just gets rid of all of that instantly. So let's see if that takes place. Underwear is going to run with the Forest Craft deck first, and there we see Homecoming, the card that we've been talking about against Eplicas' Shadow. So no, I guess, more appropriate matchup than now.
That's right. And this is just a classic matchup. This is if Shadow can beat Forest fast enough, or it can put together a defensive enough game plan to actually just outlast what Forest is trying to do. So it's really tough. And I actually made a mistake with Homecoming really quick, Mofu. It can't actually bounce Seraph. I forgot. For some reason, I thought it bounced Amulets too, but it only bounces Followers. So it can't actually do the thing that I was saying. So forget about that. I'm stupid.
Alright, all good. Something that I find really interesting is that if there were a single mid-range shadow list for this Forest list to do really well against, I think it's actually going to be Eplicas's. Because whereas Wolf and Bolt and all that, it can be kind of ward resilient, Homecoming is really the card that thrives upon opponents that are trying to deal with the combo using wards. And Eplicas's list has 2 Dark Blade Fiends and 2 Death Breaths, and the Triple Thane here to try to kind of get it out of the way.
And yeah, I mean, it's one of the only tools that can actually fight through that. Otherwise, you're gonna have to do stuff like Airbound Barrage 1, maybe even jam a Roach into 1, evolve over to 1, and then maybe set up a following turn. I have seen it is possible to win through a Death's Breath, but is very unlikely without something like a Homecoming.
Really, what amazes me is that although we had already kind of made the observation previously that a lot of people are turning back to Roach OTK now that the stakes are much higher and these games require a much more consistent, powerful strategy that can be versatile in a lot of matchups, what really is surprising me is everyone's bringing White Wolf techs of some kind. Perhaps it is just for that non-linearity, but I mean, I still don't know what to make of it. I've seen them both successful and unsuccessful these past few days.
Well, it makes sense to me because if the format slows down, right? If you have just the linear OTK Roach package, it's really easy to read. Because of the nature of open decklist tournaments, if you know your opponent doesn't have anything outside of the Roach combo to kill you, you know how to stop it. If they add these extra cards in like White Wolf, it gives them that extra late game push when these games go to like turn 10, turn 11, turn 12, to not just be saving up for a Roach combo, but also to have that non-linear strategy of being able to kill something or kill an opponent through a White Wolf combo.
We probably saw exactly what you were talking about yesterday with Kionis versus Akamoto Red when he started to run into the combo pieces of the one way he could win the game and no backup plan was eventually the slow, tough end of him. But
right, exactly. One of the things that Forest does not do very well is top deck in the late game when it's just playing the OTK package. You're drawing things like Fairy Circle, Angelic Snipe, Nature's Guidances. Without Evo points, Elven Princess, Mages, and Finas, you're not really doing anything crazy, right? So it's really hard once you're out of Evos in top deck mode. If you don't have combo in hand with just the regular Roach package, you're literally doing nothing. You're just trying to win with Wood of Brambles, Fairy Circles, poke damage, and things like that, which not very likely.
That's what makes this list so interesting to me is with Homecoming, that's not really an alternate win condition. Rather, it's just like a way to push the one win condition you're working with. We see he runs Angelic Snipes, other things, the double Fina. He wants to be as consistent about having Roaches as possible in order to make sure his White Wolf plan succeeds as consistently as it can.
Yeah, absolutely. And I find no fault with it. If you really like the Roach combo, if you're very confident that you can win with the combo, you know all of your Roach math, and Homecoming's that one thing that you think will bust through all of the defenses, it's a fine pick.
I think compared to the King Elephants, Homecoming might be my favorite of the techs so far.
Yeah, it's interesting to me too, because you can just straight up play it after your opponent plays a Death's Breath too. Like if you're on the play, they played Death's Breath, they used up all of their shadows, you play a Homecoming on it, it resets the board, and I think you feel just fine after that again.
Yeah, I didn't think about this before, but I now remembered because of the nature of how Death's Breath works. It's not like you get those 2-3 wards back into your hand. Those are just fighters, right? 2 cost, 2/2 zombies.
That's right. And they can fill up your hand even, especially if you've been keeping a high hand count, you play the Death's Breath out, it could bounce enough zombies back to your hand to overdraw, which could, negate something like a Thane or an Ektar later in the game, which could be very powerful.
So to get back into how this game has been progressing so far, one thing I've noticed in particular is neither side really has had a very aggressive opener. It's been a lot of trading between Wood of Brambles fighting against Ares's. One thing I've noticed though, Underwear has developed his hand very, very well so far. Even risks a mill, but knows he has access to a Roach now, and otherwise has a lot of pieces in hand that can contribute to a combo.
Right. So he's mostly there. I think he needs about one more Roach, but he's got plenty of defensive plays here. He's got Aaron into Aaron, he's got Cassiopeia, so he's not worried about dying by any means. And looking at Eplicas' hand, he definitely doesn't need to be worried at this point.
And this hand develops very easily as well. Andrialphus with double soul conversions doesn't have to worry about this Aaron. It's little tiny bits of chip damage you can get before he actually needs to develop into an Eekter or a win condition.
And I think he might even opt to use a second soul conversion here. Never mind. He just wants to fill up the board here. Just so he could draw into something, but I guess Thane was all he was looking for, so...
Or even if not Thane, next turn he can soul conversion to look for an Eekter. And if he draws it off of that, he can still play it with the remaining play points. How fast Underwear actually completes his the hand that he needs here, I think, is the main thing to watch out for.
Yep. Oh, and I do have an interesting question for you, Mofu. So Andrialphus has been picking up a lot of steam in Mid-Shadow. It was never seen before, I think, about 2 to 3 weeks ago. I think that everyone just kind of left it off the radar because it was just a 2-play point 1/2, didn't evolve into a +2/+2 stat line. But now we're seeing it as this just really grindy card. How do you feel about the card?
Andrialphus is a really weird one to kind of dissect, because it's very rare that a card in Shadowverse, especially with how fast the meta tends to evolve towards, that has this low tempo on it, that also has a sort of conditional evolve that you must send on it. Usually cards like this just don't make it, like, with any exception of like maybe Magic Owl, and that's because speed is built into it. And Andrialphus, in a world where both Demon Eater and Soul Conversion are already providing card draw, at first it surprised me a lot. But as I started to kind of see how players have been using it and how effective it has been, what I'm starting to develop as a theory is, the reason why Andrialphus works so well is because when you have those early game cards in the mid-range list like Skull Beast or Lurching Corpses that don't really have solid targets, Bone Chimeras even, it suddenly allows you to play out these cards that were otherwise just kind of vanilla stat lines that don't do much, and treat all of them as sort of little cycles by themselves. They generate shadows, they find your win conditions. You don't need the other parts or to spend time using the other card draw anymore if you just spend one Evo point on an Andrialphus.
That's fair. Yeah, because that's one of the things that we actually see with Shadow. We haven't seen it lately. I know when I play Shadow it happens to me a lot, but in the mid-game you have no Ektars, no Thanes, your hand's filled with Lurching Corpses, Soul Squashers, Bone Chimeras, things like that. Andrialphus can actually get you back into the game so you're not just dead drawing for the rest of the game, or at least you're drawing at a much more rapid pace so that you can get to your end game. So I really like it as a new addition.
Yeah, it reminds me as well that you mentioned it was kind of discovered pretty recently. When players started using Andrialphus, I remember very distinctly the sheer number of times mid-range Shadow players kind of like made a tough call with it or tried to use it for as much value as possible, and then milled like 2 to 4 cards per game just by like using it into soul conversions and such. But now we don't see that happen anymore. We've seen it, like as a special example here, Eplicas played out and developed his hand already into a Catacomb, and then when he was hovering at about just 6 cards in hand with only 1 win condition, that's when he chooses to go for it. I think even just learning some new tech on how to make the most use of these cards is a huge part of how much it's gotten better as well.
And I like the effective use of board space here. Eplicas realizing that he doesn't want to fill up his board, maybe give attention so that he can start playing things like Ektar. He doesn't want to be board locked for it. However, this plays right into Cassiopeia.
Does inflict a pretty fair amount of damage with that line of play. The only thing that I'm noticing in particular is I think that this board was just the slightest bit vulnerable to if Underwear was about to develop a White Wolf.
Yes.
It would have canceled a
as
lot
well.
of possible... Yeah, he knows he has a 0-cost Goblin Mage. Would have canceled a lot of possible strong plays for Eplicas to make onto the board next turn. And no other trick like a Death's Breath or developing another Thane with a sacrifice effect would have really gotten around that.
Yeah, it's probably just the ever-present fear of Ektar. Because Eplicas kind of cleared up his board a lot, I think Underwear knows that he either needs to get followers out of play so that there is no room for Eplicas to board clear, or I'm sorry, to have board space to play Ektar. But, again, I think Underwear is still going to go with this Cassiopeia play. I can't really see a better line here. I think he's just trying to mitigate the advantage that Lurching Corpse could get if Cassiopeia was the only follower in play. So he's kind of doing his math here on the best way to do this.
The stars pale beside me.
Something kind of interesting to me is he did develop a Fairy right beforehand, which missed 2 points of damage, I think.
And Eplicas did win the lottery there. Of course, Cassiopeia dying to the Lurching Corpse after it triggered. It's kind of a smart play, too. I think Underwear tried to go under the damage threshold to maybe just miss the Lurching Corpse and give him that option, while also counting the fact that he had one Fairy left over with an Angelic Snipe to actually finish off the Bane. However, if that Fairy was the one that was killed instead of the Cassiopeia, that White King would still be in play right now. Very interesting decision-making on that turn from Underwear.
Right. That also kind of lends itself to, even though effects like Will of the Forest and Cassiopeia often just have this kind of variance to them by nature of how they target randomly, when they don't offer perfect board clears, sometimes that leads to a lot of different matrices of how the order in which you play out your cards can control the random targeting to a way that gives you like these two possible scenarios where the most important thing is just whether one thing survives or otherwise. I think it worked out just fine for him there, but his position is still a little bit tough. He doesn't really have development for the size of his hand. He has a lot of combo pieces, actually.
He does, and as a matter of fact, I believe with his current hand, if he can wait out this next turn and not die, keep that Evo point, I think he's got this.
Right, that is a 0-cost fairy. It's sometimes hard to see because I just realized I neglected to wear my glasses today. But Goblin Mage into 0-cost fairy, that's double roaches in hand with an Angelic Snipe. So he'll have
so it'd be
3
4
cards,
bounce,
dealt 1 damage.
6, 7. Yeah, so we're looking at 17 with Evo, 19 with Angelic Snipe, 20. So he actually just has lethal perfectly in hand right now.
And considering Eplicas' hand, it's going to be flawless so far, but if Eplicas has a read on just how much of a tell I think playing Aaron into a board like this and not evolving is, then I imagine the Soul Conversion's coming out this turn. He has a lot of effective wards that could just completely jam this, like Death's Breath or Saber Altar. There's one.
He drew it. Needed that card. Didn't play it.
Ooh.
Going into turn 10. Wow. Okay, so 1 damage shy of lethal here for the push, but again, no retaliation for this Roach combo that's about to end the game.
Well, it's fair. I actually think this is perfectly fair. Even though we know the Saber Altar was absolutely the line to go for, Eplicas understands that Underwear has already played a 0-cost from the Elven Princess Mage earlier and has a Goblin Mage. He probably figures with 2 0-costs, then he's not going to have the 5, 7, 8. But that just simply doesn't account for the Angelic Snipe in hand with the Evo point. I think that's the only other way to kind of reach 20, other than having a third 0-cost.
I'll tell you this much. When I'm playing against Forest, I know they have 2 0-costs going into turn 10. I 100% play that ward. I never let them try to eke out past that. And I think Underwear is just doing the math here, doing it slowly so he doesn't mess anything up. He actually has more than 20 damage with the Sylvan Justice drawn from hand. So
This is actually just a 5, 7, 8. because of the Sylvan Justice. He didn't need the Evo point after all, but still played perfectly in order to set it up. Absolutely just manages this win in a really impressive manner.
That's right, and Eplicas is like, just this close! You know what, Eplicas? After this game, you're gonna take a look at that Saber Altar in your hand and be like, oh crap. Oh crap! I could have protected myself.
It's like one of those things that develops over time, is you take risks like this, you put them to 1 health because you know you just are going to have it right afterwards. But after a game like that, I think that's what changes a player. Like, I think that has now bitten Eplicas into wanting to kind of develop his wards in a much more cautious manner against that kind of list, or at least most people I know who ever like jam wards as soon as they know that Forest is kind of in the late game and has like a Goblin Mage in hand, have kind of been shied towards.
Actually, you know what? Now that I think about it, the Saber Altar with only 5 toughness, especially with the Sylvan Justice drawn, I think even without the Sylvan Justice, with the Angelic Snipe in hand, because the Roaches were 5, 7, 8, he could have just evoed the Goblin Mage with an Angelic Snipe into the Saber Altar anyway and gone for lethal. So I don't think actually Eplicas had a way to stop that damage.
Oh yeah, you're absolutely right. Though that does like that did require him to draw the Sylvan Justice right afterwards, but yeah, you are absolutely right with that.
Yeah, he needed to draw another, like, the Saber Altar play meant that Underwear had to draw something that wasn't expensive, or that he didn't have to play to the board necessarily. But yeah, of course Underwear drew when he needed to anyway, so the Saber Altar would not have mattered.
The really lasting regret there, I think, is that if Eplicas had found one of his 2 Death Breaths instead, then that would have like been completely... I'm sure he would have jammed it in that case, because that would have just been a full safeguard against anything. Even White Wolf there wouldn't have been fully developed against it.
Right. Absolutely. So now we get to see if Shadow can outpace Seraph. This is not a matchup I've actually seen a lot of lately.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, not really. I mean, Seraph has one of the best answers to Shadow in the fact that it has a lot of Banish to prevent last word effects, to prevent shadows from building up. It means Deathly Tyrant is a really hard option to actually end the game with as Shadow, if that was the end game plan. As well as just in the mid game, Soul Squashers are harder to use because they'll usually drain all of the shadows that you have. And of course, Priest of the Cudgel, being one of the best cards that's ever been printed against Shadow, does come into play here.
I think that there's actually a lot of like little facets of how interesting this matchup is going to become thanks to these lists. As you mentioned, a lot of Shadow Denial, though I think what that really works against is Ictor this time around, because Eplicas is one of those Shadow players that decided not to opt into the Tyrant. The difference is made on Ictor. But Underwear's list runs 3 Dark Juns, and that I think is the ultimate hedge versus Shadow. Maybe not versus Death's Breath, assuming he gets the shadows for that to be active, but it works against Zombie Party and a lot of things like that. So I think that this is actually a pretty decent chance that Underwear has, if not an advantage in the matchup, he has an advantageous list to do as well as I think Seraph will prove itself to be able to versus Mid-Shadow here.
Right, and I think, like, exactly like you said, this deck is really tech to beat Shadow. 3 Dark Johns is crazy good against Shadow, and one of the other things that I really like about Dark John and Seraph specifically is you can go an aggressive route with the deck now. So if, for whatever reason, and this is kind of like a mindset thing you go into when you're playing against Seraph, their followers can't kill you, so you don't really care about trading as much, you're just trying to push as much damage as you can face so that you can prevent those turn 8 Seraphs from hitting play, right? But Seraph gives the deck a new dimension to where if you do just ignore all of the followers in play, Dark John can she can just come down and win the game for you on the spot with whatever followers you have in play, especially on the back of cards like this why can't I think of the name? This call, Beast Call Aria. There we go. That just pops to actually just push for a ton of damage.
I mean, this popping and giving him the board is the difference between this Death's Breath completely surviving Dark John and just being a kind of mediocre defensive option against it. It's kind of funny. We always make this observation about Seraph, but often Seraph itself just doesn't really end up being the win condition. He has Eplicas on the back foot, and that is why I think he's moving into Seraph being safe to play in the first place. But keep an opponent on the back foot long enough, and Dark John turns into her own win condition.
Absolutely right. Like we've seen it in weeks past where Seraph will literally just never be able to play Seraph, and then it really just has to win with playing, unevolved Priest of the Cudgels and hoping their Beast Call Arias pop in time and things like that. And these are lists without Dark Johns, and they can still win through that push. It just takes much longer. This effectively cuts that turn extension into the end of the game way down, because if any of these threats stay alive, even those late game Priest of the Cudgels, they can get pumped up and just smack face for a ton of damage.
So, looking at this particular game, especially with Eplicas not making the fastest possible play he can with Death's Breath, and I actually agree with that very much. Just with how slow his hand has developed so far, I think this may be the one time where we see Seraph played where the actual combo has a very strong chance of going off.
That's right. Underwear has maintained really good control of this board, especially going into turn 6 when the only opposing follower at the moment is a Demon Eater. I think he feels very comfortable at this stage. Let's see, he's already got Healing Prayer, Seraph, Healing Prayer. The only 2 Amulet Poppers at the moment, but he still has plenty of time to draw one.
One of these cool uses of Dark Jun here is, I know a lot of people shy away from this card because they don't want to damage their own board, but I think that right there, just a very modest use of her, is already a demonstration of just how good she can be. She has developed a really powerful body. I think 5/5 is absolutely nothing to scoff at. It's just 1 point off of being premium even. And being able to wipe an opponent's injured evolved follower, any kind of trash that got picked up along the wayside, it's a lot of potential power that you kind of have to see through the situational nature of the other sides of her effect to be able to kind of appreciate, I think.
And if you really take a look at Shadow's list, there are only really 2 cards that kind of overcome a 5/5 body on its own. And those are your big endgame threats. So Dark John being able to clear a board, present a threat, and force Eplicas, I think, even to making probably the Stain Plate evolve over it, just so that it doesn't stay in play, is really the only way just to kill it outright. And now he's kind of opening himself up for Dark John just to get even more value over these turns here.
And going defensively for the Death's Breath actually is something which offers Underwear so much more time. And Underwear, I think, plays out perfectly here. He knows next turn is going to be the first opportunity where he can play out his Seraph, so he just expends the Evo point, takes full control of the board, leaves as many bodies for Eplicas to need to play into as possible. Right now, I think what's interesting to observe is these bodies don't necessarily go face at all. Rather, the Storm, the 5/3, and the 4/4 are kind of like delayed removal spells, with like 4, 5, and 2 damage, where anything Eplicas tries to develop is not alive on board for the turn where Underwear plays Seraph, just because he's developed board control.
And another and really important thing to note about a deck like Seraph, and the reason we're talking about it a little bit more is just because it's a deck you guys don't often see, just so you guys get some more insight into it. Notice the timing of Underwear's amulets. He perfectly timed his Beast Call to pop on the turn that he could play Seraph to open up that window. He reserved an Evo point for the Tiger to actually do some damage along with the Storm Follower, so I think this is a really easy board to play Seraph into, and he already has 3 amulet countdowns now, drawing that Star Torrent.
I would have to say he's probably going to be pretty fast about this one. I don't think he's going to wait on it. Milling that Seraph doesn't matter at all. Confident, very, very easy call to make. And Eplicas, I don't think he has any kind of response to this. Underwear is still at 19. He still has Healing Prayers to shrug off any residual damage that is on board here. And no win condition to really push a huge amount of damage here. Eeked or not in hand, and wouldn't be a very great use here either.
That's right. We're about to see a very quick 2-0 yet again. We'll play a little bit and let the Seraph do its job, make its little light wings and, you know, crush the opponent here. Poor little Luna getting bullied.
Right, as always. I remember when Haven used to just absolutely dumpster Shadow because of how their mechanics work. But that said, Hollow Dogma, Purple Healing Prayer, has more pieces than he really needs.
Right.
Slow decks, but very quick victories today.
Very quick victories. This is about as fast as I think we've seen a Seraph win on a cast in one of these competitive tournaments. They just have it. Underwear just had it this game.
Underwear takes the win 2-0. I feel like the last few times we've seen Seraph, we've seen this scenario where there's just so much tempo gained by things like Arya and Dark Jeans have played a big part of it as well. It just seems like so much tempo. I don't know if it's just how the cards have played out in these matches, but I don't know if you guys have the same impression, but I have a strong recollection.